The sun barely crept over the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet Texas countryside. The air was thick with the scent of fresh soil, the remnants of a late-night rain still clinging to the leaves. Idris Elba stood on the wooden porch of his farmhouse sipping a cup of black coffee, his eyes scanning the vast stretch of farmland he had spent years tending. This land was his sanctuary, an escape from the chaos of his past, a place where he could finally live life on his own terms. But today, something felt off. As he took a step down from the porch, his boots sank slightly into the damp earth. He walked toward the main fields, his senses sharp, his instincts honed from years of knowing when something wasn't right. And then he saw it. His crops, his beautiful, thriving crops, destroyed. The rich, green stalks of corn and rows of fresh vegetables were crushed, tire tracks carving deep wounds into the soil. His wooden fences, once standing tall and firm, were smashed apart like they had been run over repeatedly. His livestock, gone. The pens were broken open, gates twisted off their hinges. A few chickens lay lifeless near the barn, their necks snapped. Idris clenched his jaw, his grip tightening around his coffee cup until it cracked in his hands. This wasn't nature. This was deliberate. His steps quickened, his heart pounding, not from fear but from the slow, simmering rage beginning to bubble beneath his calm exterior. He reached the dirt path leading to his main gate, and that's when he saw the final insult. A bright red eviction notice pinned to his front gate. The words were bold, printed in harsh capital letters. "This land belongs to the HOA now. Leave Oregon, regret it." At the bottom, a signature, Victoria Henshaw. Idris exhaled through his nose, long and slow. He had been dealing with Victoria and her Homeowners Association for months. She was a wealthy, entitled woman who saw herself as the queen of this small town. The HOA wasn't just about keeping neighborhoods tidy. It was a tool of control. And Victoria? She had set her sights on his land, determined to drive him out by any means necessary. At first, it was the constant fines, petty infractions. His barn was too old, his fence was too tall. Then came the threats, anonymous notes in his mailbox, phone calls in the middle of the night, a dead snake left on his porch. But this, destroying his crops, stealing his livestock, tearing down his fences, this was war. With slow, measured steps, Idris turned and walked back toward his farmhouse. He didn't stomp, he didn't run. His movements were precise, controlled. A man like him didn't react, he calculated. Inside his house, the air was still. He sat at his desk, cracked his knuckles, and opened his laptop. With a few clicks, he accessed the feed from his security cameras. He had set them up months ago after the HOA started their harassment. He scrolled through the footage, his eyes cold and unreadable. And then, there she was, Victoria Henshaw. Her white Jeep Wrangler tore through his fields, bouncing over the crops, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. She was in the driver's seat, laughing, her sunglasses perched on top of her perfectly styled blonde hair. In the passenger seat, her husband, Martin Henshaw, casually drinking from a coffee cup as if they were on a Sunday drive. The footage showed them spinning donuts in his field, crushing his hard work beneath their tires. His livestock truck was parked nearby, and soon he saw Victoria's hired men loading his cattle into the truck and driving away. They had stolen from him. They had laughed while doing it. Idris exhaled. His expression didn't change. No anger, no shouting. He reached down, opened the bottom drawer of his desk, and pulled out a gunmetal gray Glock 19. With practiced ease, he slid out the magazine, checked the rounds, then pushed it back in with a satisfying click. He closed his laptop. Then he stood up. A man like Idris Elba didn't make threats. He didn't yell. He took action. And Victoria Henshaw was about to learn what happens when you push the wrong man. The smell of gasoline still lingered in the air. Idris stood in the wreckage of his fields, the dried stalks of his crops flattened into the mud, his fences nothing more than shattered wood. The morning sun was rising, casting long golden streaks over the ruined land. But in Idris's eyes there was no warmth, only calculation. He needed to understand who he was truly up against. Back inside his farmhouse, he sat down at his desk and dug deep. His past life had taught him how to investigate, how to uncover what people wanted hidden. He started with the HOA's financial records, public data, old reports, anything that could expose their game. And then the pieces started falling into place. The HOA wasn't just some petty neighborhood board enforcing strict lawn regulations. It was a front, a land-grabbing operation that had been swallowing up properties in this rural Texas town for years. Victoria Henshaw and her husband Martin were at the center of it. They weren't just enforcing rules. They were targeting black landowners. Using shady legal tactics, they slapped property owners with fines, forced foreclosures, and safety violations. If a homeowner resisted, mysterious fires, disappearances, accidents. The properties were then sold, dirt cheap, to wealthy developers. And Idris wasn't the first man they had tried to break. He leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening as he remembered Mr. Langston. The old farmer had lived in this town for decades, running a small cattle ranch on the outskirts. Last year, he fought the HOA, took them to court, refused to give up his land. Then, one night, his house burned to the ground. They called it an accident, but everyone knew the truth. The fire chief wouldn't investigate. The sheriff ruled it electrical failure. Langston barely survived. With no home, no money, and no legal recourse, he was forced to leave town. Now Idris was in the same position, and the message was clear. Fight back and you'll burn too. Idris took his truck into town, driving past the neatly trimmed lawns and perfect white picket fences of the HOA's prized community. The sheriff's office sat right in the middle of Main Street, a small, old building with a faded flag waving in the morning breeze. Inside, the place smelled like stale coffee and cigarette smoke. Sheriff Dale Rivers leaned back in his chair as Idris walked in, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. Rivers was a big man, built like an aging linebacker, his uniform snug around his belly. Idris dropped a flash drive on the desk. "Security footage," he said flatly, "shows Victoria Henshaw destroying my farm. She stole my livestock, ran her Jeep through my fields." The sheriff picked up the drive, rolling it between his fingers like it was a cheap poker chip. He sighed, then set it down without even plugging it in. "Look, Elba," he said, voice slow and lazy. "I know you're upset, but maybe it's time to start thinking about moving on." Idris's expression didn't change. The sheriff leaned forward. "Victoria and Martin, they're important people. They've got deep pockets, connections. And this town, we like things to stay peaceful." "That a threat?" Idris asked quietly. Rivers gave him a knowing smile. "It's a warning. Don't go making things hard for yourself." Idris studied the sheriff for a long moment. Then he picked up the flash drive, pocketed it, and walked out. He had his answer. The law wasn't going to help him. That night, the smell of smoke jolted Idris awake. He bolted upright, heart hammering. The orange glow outside his window confirmed his worst fear. His barn was on fire. By the time he made it outside, the flames were already towering, licking the sky, sparks flying like fireflies into the dark. The heat hit his face like a wall. His horses screamed inside, trapped. Idris didn't hesitate. He grabbed a crowbar and sprinted into the fire. The heat scorched his skin, smoke clawing at his lungs as he reached the stalls. He swung the crowbar, smashing the locks, kicking the gates open. The horses burst free, galloping into the night. As he stumbled out of the burning barn, coughing, his vision blurred from the smoke, he saw them. Two men, standing by a black SUV at the edge of his property, watching. One of them, a thin man in a leather jacket, smirked and lit a cigarette off the burning barn. Then they got in their car and drove away. No fear, no rush, like they had just finished a job. Idris stood in the glow of the fire, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles cracked. They had made their move. Now it was his turn. And he wasn't just going to fight back. He was going to burn them down. Idris stood in the shadows of his ruined field, his sharp eyes scanning the tree line. The smell of burnt wood and smoke from his barn still lingered in the air, a bitter reminder of what they had done. And now they were coming again. He saw them, 3 men slipping onto his land, moving fast and low, dressed in black, ski masks pulled tight. Probably HOA enforcers. They thought he was asleep. They were wrong. Idris moved like a ghost. Years of experience kicked in, silent steps, controlled breathing. He cut through the field, positioning himself behind them. The first guy knelt down near his fence, pulling a crowbar from his backpack. He never saw Idris move. A quick arm around the throat, a squeeze, a struggle, then silence. The second man turned too late. Idris slammed his head against the wooden fence, dropping him instantly. The third one heard the noise. He spun around, gun in hand, but Idris was already on him. One brutal strike to the wrist, the gun clattered into the dirt. A follow-up elbow to the ribs, and the man collapsed with a wheeze. Idris crouched next to him, his voice low and deadly. "Who sent you?" The man shook his head, trembling. Idris calmly pressed a knee onto his chest, applying pressure. "You got one more chance." The man gasped, his breath hitching. Then he cracked. "Victoria," he wheezed. "She said, make you quit. Said, more's coming." Idris stood up, looking at the unconscious bodies around him. Let him come. Idris needed proof, something solid. He spent the next few nights tracking Victoria's movements, watching who she met with, where she went. Eventually he caught a break, a secret HOA gathering at Martin Henshaw's private estate. Idris got in the way he always did. Quietly, dressed in black, he moved through the trees surrounding the mansion. The HOA board was inside. Victoria, Martin, and a dozen others. Big names in the town, developers, officials, people who controlled everything. He slipped around the back, pressing against the cool brick of the house. A slightly open window. He pulled out his phone, started recording. Inside, Victoria's voice was sharp and confident. "We're almost there," she said. "The fire didn't work, but that doesn't matter. We'll make sure he's out of the picture by next week." Someone chuckled. "Another fire?" "No," Victoria said. "Something better." She leaned forward, her voice dripping with amusement. "We plant drugs on his land, call in an anonymous tip. Cops come in, discover everything. He's arrested, thrown away for years." A few board members murmured approval. Idris tightened his grip on his phone. Victoria smirked. "By the time he's out, this land will already be sold." A soft click. Idris ended the recording. Now he had what he needed. The next night, Idris was waiting. Just like clockwork, 2 HOA goons crept onto his land carrying black duffel bags. Idris already knew what was inside. Drugs, cocaine, maybe heroin. Enough to put him away for life. He let them move deeper into his land, closer to his ruined barn. Then he struck. The first guy barely had time to register the shadow moving toward him before Idris cracked him across the jaw. The second tried to run, but Idris yanked him back, slamming him into the dirt. They begged. Wait, just doing a job, man." Idris kneeled next to them, his voice like steel. "You're gonna tell me everything. Right now." The second guy, breathing hard, stammered. Victoria gave the order. Told us to plant the stuff, make sure the cops found it." Idris studied them for a long moment. Then he picked up the duffel bags, walked them straight into the barn, and set them on fire. The flames roared, consuming the planted evidence. The 2 men stared in shock. One of them tried to run. Idris grabbed him by the collar and pulled him back. "You're going to call Victoria," he said. "Tell her it's done. Tell her the drugs are in place." The man swallowed hard. She'll know." Idris leaned in. "Then make it convincing." Shaking, the man fumbled for his phone, pressed dial. Victoria answered almost immediately. "It's done," the goon said, voice shaking. The package is placed." Victoria laughed softly. Good. Cops will be there in the morning. You did good. The call ended. Idris smiled coldly. Now she thought she had won. The goons were still on their knees, staring up at Idris. What happens now? One whispered. Idris cracked his knuckles. Now? He exhaled slowly, the glow of the fire reflecting in his eyes. Now, I end this. The truth was bigger than he thought. Idris sat in his dimly lit cabin, a glass of water in one hand, his phone in the other. The video recording from the HOA meeting played again. Victoria's smug voice, the laughter, the plan to frame him. He had them. But something didn't sit right. Victoria was rich, powerful, but not this powerful. He pulled out a second phone, one he used for digging deeper. He started making calls, reaching out to old contacts, people who owed him favors. An hour later, the answer came, and it nearly stopped his heart. Victoria and Martin weren't the real masterminds. They were just pawns. The real power behind the HOA's operation? Senator Alan Prescott. Prescott was a powerful name, a man rising fast in politics, backed by billionaires and corporations. Publicly, he was a man of the people. Privately, he was a kingmaker, a puppet master. And now Idris had proof that Prescott was using the HOA to launder money, stealing black-owned land, flipping it to developers, and funneling the profits into his campaign war chest. If this got out, it wouldn't just ruin Victoria, it would burn an entire political empire to the ground. Idris finally understood. Victoria hadn't been trying to run him off just because she was racist. She had been following orders. And now they knew he was onto them. It happened just after midnight. Idris was checking his security cameras when he noticed movement, shadows flickering in the trees. His instincts screamed. This wasn't HOA thugs. This was something else. He shut off the lights, grabbed his gun, moved silently through his house, keeping low. Then crash. His front door exploded inward. 6 men in tactical gear stormed inside, silenced weapons in hand. Idris was already moving. He dove behind the kitchen counter as bullets shredded the cabinets above him. Professional, military precision. Not HOA goons, not cops. A hit squad, sent by Prescott. The house turned into a war zone. Idris moved like a shadow, weaving between cover, returning fire with precision. His bullets hit their marks, 2 men down, screaming. But the others were good, trained. They adapted fast, flanking him, cutting off his exits. One threw a smoke grenade. Shit! The cabin filled with thick, choking smoke. Idris felt the burn in his throat as he moved blind. Footsteps rushed toward him. A shadow appeared. Idris dropped low, drove his shoulder into the man's gut. They crashed through a table, the hitman gasping as Idris wrenched the gun from his grip. Crack! A gunshot. Idris felt the burn slice across his side. He barely had time to register the pain before another hitman grabbed him from behind, trying to choke him out. Idris reacted on instinct. Headbutt, elbow to the ribs, twist, grab, snap, the man dropped, his neck at a sickening angle. 3 down, 3 left. But Idris was bleeding. The gunshot wound in his side was bad. He could feel the warmth of his own blood soaking through his shirt. No time, no time. He needed to move. He ran toward the back of the house, dodging bullets, smashing through the side window just as another burst of gunfire tore through the walls. Outside. He was outside. But so were they. A black SUV with tinted windows waited at the end of the driveway. The engine revved. One of the men inside raised a rifle. Idris dove into the tall grass just as bullets ripped through the air around him. No chance of fighting them off now. He had to disappear. Bleeding, exhausted but still breathing, Idris vanished into the woods. Hours later, Idris stood on a deserted road, shirt soaked in blood, face like stone. The hit squad had been sent to kill him. Not scare him, not warn him, kill him. That meant he was close, too close. Victoria, Martin, Prescott. They all thought they had power. They thought he was just another man to push aside. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Idris clenched his jaw, ignoring the pain in his ribs. He looked down at his bloodied hands. Then he pulled out his phone. "Oh, made a call." The voice on the other end answered after one ring. "It's me," Idris said, his voice cold. "I need weapons, a lot of them." A pause, then, "Thought you retired." Idris exhaled slowly. "I just unretired." Idris didn't sleep. The pain in his side was sharp, but it didn't matter. He had a war to start. Under the cover of darkness, he made his move. Contacts from his past life came through. Weapons, ammunition, gear, everything he needed. His fingers traced the cool metal of the shotgun, then the assault rifle beside it. Tools of destruction. He strapped on the bulletproof vest, checked the magazines, loaded up. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was war. At the HOA Clubhouse, the party was in full swing. Victoria Henshaw, dressed in an elegant black gown, raised her glass of champagne. Beside her, Martin smirked as wealthy donors and corrupt city officials clinked their glasses. They had won. Idris Elba was either dead or on the run. Prescott's hit squad had handled it. She let out a cruel laugh, basking in the power. Then rumble. The ground shook. The chandelier above trembled. Glasses rattled. A low, monstrous growl of metal and destruction filled the air. Outside, a man gasped, his drink slipping from his fingers. "Whoa, what the hell is that?" Victoria turned toward the large glass windows. Her smug grin vanished. Headlights, blinding, unstoppable. Idris Elba. Inside a bulldozer. The attack. Crash. The front gates exploded inward as the bulldozer plowed through. The fence ripped apart like paper, debris flying everywhere. Screams, panic, people scattering. Victoria's eyes widened. "No, no, no!" She turned to run. Too late. Boom! The bulldozer slammed into the front of the clubhouse, tearing through brick and glass. A massive chandelier came crashing down, shattering into a million pieces. Fire alarms screamed. The gala descended into chaos. The bulldozer lurched to a stop in the center of the wreckage. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the driver's door swung open. Idris stepped out. A shotgun slung across his back, a Glock in his hand, face like stone. No fear, no hesitation, just war. Victoria stumbled backward, her hands shaking. You're supposed to be..." Idris leveled the shotgun at her. "Dead?" His voice was cold. "Yeah, a lot of people have made that mistake." Around him, her corrupt friends cowered. The mayor, the developers, HOA board members, guilty faces. Martin reached for something under his suit. Idris didn't wait. Boom! A shotgun blast sent Martin flying backward. He hit the marble floor with a hard thud, groaning. Not dead, but done. Idris turned back to Victoria. She was trembling now. "No, please, please, we can talk about this," she stammered. Idris took a slow step forward, his boots crunching over glass. "Talk?" His tone was almost amused. He grabbed a chair, dragged it forward and sat down, casual, controlled, terrifying. "Let's talk." Victoria's breathing was shallow. What do you want?" she whispered. Idris held up his phone, pressed play. Her own voice filled the room. The secret HOA meeting recording. Every corrupt deal, every stolen property. Prescott's name, the bribes, the frame-ups. Everyone in the room heard it. No denials, no escape. Some of the guests tried to slip away. Idris fired a round into the ceiling. Nobody moves. Panic froze them in place. Victoria was hyperventilating now. Idris stood, walked up to her, leaned in. "You took everything from innocent people," he said, voice like steel. "Now you lose everything." He tossed the phone onto the bar counter. One click, and the recording would be sent to every major news station, every federal agency. This wasn't just about her. This would burn Prescott's entire empire to the ground. The final shot. Victoria's face twisted. Her fear turned to rage. She lunged for a fallen security guard's pistol bang. Idris's shotgun roared. Victoria collapsed, gasping. A bullet lodged in her leg. Not fatal, just enough to make her feel it. She screamed in pain, clutching the wound. Idris knelt beside her. His voice dropped to a whisper. Now you know what it feels like to be powerless. Then he stood, took one last look around. The entire room was frozen in terror. Idris turned, walked toward the door. Then he pressed send. The aftermath. The video spread like wildfire. News stations played the recording on repeat. FBI raids, arrests, investigations. Senator Prescott? Finished. His career burned overnight. The HOA? Dismantled. Victoria Henshaw? Locked up. The stolen land? Returned. And Idris Elba? Gone. No trace. Some say he disappeared to another quiet place. Others say he's out there, watching, waiting. Because people like Victoria, they always exist. And when they rise, Idris will rise too, to burn them down. Victoria and Martin scrambled through the wreckage. The once grand HOA clubhouse was now a battlefield. Glass, wood, and bodies littered the floor. Smoke curled from the shattered walls, the distant wail of sirens growing closer. Martin's leg bled from Idris's earlier shot, but Victoria pulled him up, her breath ragged. "We need to get out," she whispered, eyes darting. They stumbled toward the back exit. Their black Jeep was parked just beyond the gate. If they could reach it, they could disappear. But then, boom! A gunshot echoed through the night. Martin froze. His breath hitched. Behind them, Idris Elba stepped through the smoke. Oh, his silhouette was a shadow against the firelight. Gun in hand, face cold. Eyes locked on them. Martin panicked. He grabbed a broken chair leg and lunged. Bang! The shot slammed into Martin's shoulder. He crashed to the ground, screaming. Victoria stumbled back, her heels slipping on debris. "Please!" she gasped, hands trembling. Idris tilted his head. "Running?" His voice was calm. "After everything?" Victoria turned, sprinting for the Jeep. She fumbled with the keys, hands shaking too hard to grip them. Martin groaned behind her. "Vic, wait!" She didn't wait. She left him behind. As Victoria yanked open the Jeep's door, black SUVs screeched into the driveway. Men in suits, guns drawn. Senator Prescott's personal hit squad. Their leader, a tall, muscular enforcer with a scar down his cheek, locked eyes with Idris. Then gunfire erupted. Idris dived behind cover. Bullets ripped through the air, shattering windows and kicking up debris. Victoria used the distraction to slam the Jeep into reverse, tires screeching as she peeled out onto the road. Idris moved fast. Rolling out from behind cover, he fired. One of the bodyguards dropped instantly. Two more rushed him. The first *** swung a baton. Idris caught his wrist, twisted. Crack, the bone snapped. The second lunged with a knife. Idris sidestepped, shoved the barrel of his pistol into his ribs. Bang! 2 down. Scarface circled him, smirking. "I know who you are," he said, "but you don't scare me." Idris wiped a streak of blood from his temple, grinned. "Then you ain't been paying attention." Scarface lunged. Fists collided, blunt force, raw power. Scarface landed a brutal hit to Idris's ribs. Idris staggered but spun, driving an elbow into his jaw. Scarface stumbled, just enough. Idris yanked a knife from his belt, slashed. Scarface gasped, clutching his throat. He dropped to his knees, choking on blood. Idris stood over him. "You should have been scared." Scarface collapsed. Dead. Victoria's last mistake. Victoria's Jeep tore through the dark road, her breath coming in frantic gasps. She thought she was safe. Then, headlights behind her. A black motorcycle. Idris. He was coming for her. Victoria slammed her foot down, speeding faster. "No, no, no!" she screamed. Idris closed the distance. A single shot. Bang! The Jeep's back tire exploded. The vehicle swerved violently, spinning, Flipping, crash! The Jeep rolled off the road, smashing into a tree. Smoke hissed from the wreck. Victoria moaned in pain. Her arm was twisted unnaturally. Blood trickled from her forehead. A shadow fell over her. Idris. He ripped open the door, grabbed her by the collar, and yanked her out. She screamed. Her feet dragged through dirt, glass, and rubble as he pulled her back toward the ruins of the clubhouse. Her voice cracked, raw with terror. "Please, please, I can pay you." Idris kept walking, unstoppable, unforgiving. "This land belongs to me." His voice was ice. They reached the burning clubhouse. Idris threw her down into the pavement. She sobbed, shaking uncontrollably. "Please, I didn't." Idris crouched, gripping her chin, forcing her to look at him. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Leave, or regret it." Tires screeched in the distance, black SUVs, flashing lights. The FBI had arrived. Victoria turned, hope flashed in her eyes. But the agents didn't look at Idris. They looked at her, guns drawn, ready to take her in. Victoria's breath hitched. "Wait, no!" Idris stood up, stepped back. As the agents swarmed her, handcuffing her, pressing her into the ground, Victoria finally realized it was over. The land grab scheme collapsed overnight. Senator Prescott, arrested. Martin Henshaw, hospitalized, then locked up. Victoria Henshaw, dragged away in cuffs. The stolen land, returned. And Idris Elba, he vanished. Some say he walked into the woods that night and never came back. Others whisper that he's still watching. Because people like Victoria, they always exist. And when they rise, Idris will rise too, to burn them down. Victoria Henshaw lay face down on the pavement, wrists locked in cold steel. Her designer dress was torn, smeared with dirt and blood. Martin groaned beside her, his wounded legs shaking as the FBI dragged him up. He barely had the strength to resist. And the senator? Prescott stood frozen, his expensive suit drenched in sweat. The moment he stepped out of his SUV, the agents surrounded him. "Senator Prescott, you're under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, and racketeering." The words rang in the night air. Cameras flashed. Reporters yelled. The once untouchable men and women of the HOA empire were now just criminals in handcuffs. And Idris? He watched, silent, unshaken. Victoria's teary eyes found him. She shook her head, barely able to form words. You have no idea what you've done." Idris tilted his head, smirked. "Yeah? Well, neither do you." She never saw him turn away. Because to him, she was already gone. The news spread fast. The entire HOA was dismantled overnight. Investigations uncovered millions in fraud. All stolen land deeds were revoked. The victims, they got their homes back. Elderly farmers, young families, struggling ranchers, they returned to their land, free from the chains of corruption. And Idris, he never asked for thanks. One morning, an old woman, a neighbor who had lost her house to Victoria's schemes, brought him a fresh-baked pie. She smiled up at him. "You stopped them." Idris glanced out at the land, his land. The same fields his father had worked, the same soil his grandfather had tilled, his family's legacy. Safe. He nodded. "For now." The old woman frowned. "For now?" Idris didn't answer. Because he knew it was never really over. A warning from the shadows. That night, the wind howled through the valley. Idris stood on his porch, hands in his pockets, watching the stars flicker above the dark horizon. For the first time in months, his land was silent, peaceful. No goons, no threats, no fear. He should have felt safe, but he didn't. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He stared at the screen for a second before answering. He didn't say a word. A voice, low, cold, spoke first. "You made some powerful enemies, Idris." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. "Watch your back." Click. The line went dead. Idris lowered the phone. His jaw clenched. His eyes darkened. Then he smirked. He exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders, the faintest trace of amusement flickering in his gaze. Let them come. The wind whispered through the trees. He stepped off the porch, walking toward the open fields. This was his land, and no one was taking it from him again. Fade to black. Watch your back. Click. The line went dead. Idris lowered the phone. His jaw clenched. His eyes darkened. Then he smirked. He exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders, the faintest trace of amusement flickering in his gaze. Let them come. The wind whispered through the trees. He stepped off the porch, walking toward the open fields. This was his land, and no one was taking it from him again.